Gospel according to Matthew.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But by this time the boat, battered by the waves, was far from the land, for the wind was against them. And early in the morning, he came walking toward them on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified, saying, "It is a ghost." And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And Jesus said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat, started walking on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he noticed the strong wind, he became frightened, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him, saying to him, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" When they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
I love this story, especially the part where Peter gives it a shot. And as I'll say in the sermon, there's kind of two ways to hear what Jesus said. Is like really criticizing him because he just didn't trust enough. And sometimes that's the way we interpret it. But I think it's more gentle than that. It's just saying, like, I got this. Just trust me. So Lisa did the first part of this story about Elijah with the altar and the contest, and that God won. But Jezebel, the queen, is really upset because she was fond of the Baal god, and all of her prophets had been killed, and she put a wanted ad, or not a wanted ad, wrong one, a most wanted person, and I'm gonna vow that by tomorrow this guy's gonna be dead. So understandably, Elijah is scared, and he flees for his life. And God then, he's just so depressed. And he says, like, this is just too much. And that's where Lisa's story, telling of the story, comes in. He needed a snack, as she put it. And the part she didn't tell is that this snack was so powerful, it was more than a granola bar, apparently, because he went for 40 days with nothing else except the energy that God had given to him. But he still wanted, the queen is still looking for his neck to kill him. So God says, "Go and stand on the mountain before the Lord," the passage that John read to us. "For the Lord is about to pass by." Now there was a great wind, so strong it was splitting mountains and breaking rocks in pieces before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a sound of sheer silence. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. Then there came to him a voice that said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" This passage is paired with this Matthew story about Jesus going up on the mountain by himself to pray. As I said, Elijah had been sentenced to death by Queen Jezebel. He was running for his life. He was scared. He was so depressed that he just wanted to die. We read in the wilderness, he asked God that he might die. He said, "It is enough, O Lord, take away my life, for I am no better than my ancestors." That's when Jesus, or rather God, said to him, "Go out and stand on the mountain." In this gospel story of Jesus, he had just dismissed an enormous crowd where the sick were cured, and 5,000 men plus women and children had been fed by the disciples with 5 loaves and 2 fish blessed by Jesus. And the text reads, "And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up the mountain by himself to pray. And when evening came, he was there alone." But unlike Elijah, Jesus was not running for his life. Surely he too was grieving, not though for himself like Elijah was feeling really kind of a lot of like, "Lord, why did I get into this? Why did you get me into this mess?" But he's grieving because he just got the news that his cousin John had been beheaded by order of King Herod. And Jesus was not only grieving, but he was also probably really tired because he had just ministered to probably 10,000 or more people. What a day he'd had. And likely he was mindful that the day would come when he too, like John, would be put to death. Jesus needed to be alone. He needed quiet. He needed time to pray. During the confessions of sins, I invited you to pay a special attention to that silence. Because those silences are intentional. It's a time when God can actually speak in that quiet, that little, still, small voice to you. Maybe bring to mind those things about which you are ashamed or wish hadn't happened or feel guilt about. But also to reassure you then that God hears, the God of mercy and compassion and righteousness and peace. After the sermon today, I've asked Bruce to just give us like a full minute, which could seem like really long if we're not used to it. What do I do with that? I just wait for the hymn to come, but no. In the silence, in that sound of sheer silence then, let God speak in your heart. So it's not only sound of sheer silence, but also translated the way that most of us heard it, a still small voice. Or someone has translated a softly whispering voice deep in your heart. I think that's how the Father spoke to Jesus, his Son. I think that's the primary way the Holy Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit speak to all of us. It's in that still, small voice. I'm only beginning to appreciate the words of Martin Luther, who once said that when he knew the day ahead would be especially challenging, he would pray for 2 hours before engaging all that would come today. I am far from mastering that one. But don't you know, and I know, that when we have been still as we can be, even for a few minutes, we are sometimes given greater focus and clarity about what's next in our life. What and how God would have us be and do to live the most loving, full, rich life each day. There's a song about silence. It's called Now the Silence. It's not a Peter Simon one, but it's one in our hymn book, and you may have heard it and sung it before. And I've asked Deb to sing it during the distribution of Holy Communion, but I want to speak the words of it now. Now the silence, now the peace, now the empty hands uplifted, now the kneeling, now the plea, now the Father's arms and welcome, now the hearing, now the power, now the vessel brim for pouring, now the body, now the blood, now the joyful celebration, now the wedding, now the songs, now the heart forgiven leaping, now the Spirit's visitation, now the Son's epiphany, now the Father's blessing, now. Now the silence, now wherein the still small voice may be heard. For Jesus and for each of us in whom he dwells, such silence is filled with God's very self. The sheer silence is a way that God prepares us for whatever faces us, including the storms that come into our life. Again, the text. When evening came, he was alone. But by this time the boat, battered by the waves, was far from the land, for the wind was against them. And early in the morning he came walking toward them on the sea. Early in the morning, early each morning, might we say, might we believe that Jesus is walking toward us. I think about the people, as you do, I'm sure, on the island of Maui, where the wind and the waves, and most disastrously, the raging fires have swept through entire villages. Can they believe that Jesus is walking toward them, these shocked and devastated people? Can they believe that his Father's arms are now and forever holding even loved ones who have perished? For the survivors, maybe not right now. Maybe now God is for them at best an apparition, at worst bringing judgment and death. But can we believe for them that Jesus is walking toward them? Can we believe that when their hope and their faith is failing, when they are drowning, Jesus is reaching out to rescue them? But closer to home, it was a recent Tuesday Bible study when one of the members of the study shared with us something much less consequential than that faced by the people in Maui. But it went like this. Some months ago, we approved our annual budget. And you might remember, if you were there, we counted on the sale of a portion of our property to eliminate a still significant financial debt on our building. But as time went on, we realized that it probably wasn't going to happen this year. It will be a challenge. Granted, this is nowhere near the challenge for the people of Hawaii, but it is a challenge for us. Will we be able to meet our obligations to provide word and sacrament and other forms of caring for each other? Will we be able to meet our obligations to provide consistent care for others in this hurting and frightened world that we've been called to generously and steadfastly serve? But hear the gospel for the people of Hawaii and for us, members and friends of faith. For this and any other challenges we face, whether great or small, Jesus is on the mountain in the night of our distress, praying for us. And now Jesus is on his way to help us. Though we may not immediately recognize him, can we not, in the silence of our hearts, hear him say, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." Maybe we are Peter. "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And Jesus said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat, started walking on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he noticed the strong wind, he became frightened, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him, saying to you, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" When they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshiped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." As I said earlier, you could hear this as like belittling or even shaming, but maybe it's a gentle, softly spoken reminder to Peter to trust. Jesus has got this. The worst storms in our lives cannot separate us from God's saving love made known to us in his Son. Now the silence. Now in the silence following this sermon, think of a strong, battering wind in your own life. Then hear Jesus walking on troubled waters, saying to you, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." Amen.